Welcome, all you Minties. This is the Uncanny Omar, and it is my pleasure that I am very humbled by this appearance on this show today, and that is my favorite writer, not comic book writer, not my favorite writer of all time, Chris Claremont, is here
Thank you very
with
much.
us today. No, thank you, sir, for joining us on this Tuesday at 11:30 here in the state of Kentucky. So,
Oh, hang on.
I mean, it is no secret to anybody that has watched my show for the last few years or just tuned in last week that you are my favorite writer of all time.
Thank you. That's
You,
very kind.
you, and I think every time I have met you, I tell you that like you need a reminder. But
Find me a
it's just
writer who disagrees with being told they're someone's favorite.
true, true. But it is always, and you've always been kind. You're kind to everybody that you meet. Anytime I ever see you at a convention, you give everybody their time and talk to them about stories that played behind the scenes. And I love listening to you. I think when I got to interview you last year. We talked for about an hour on the show, and then there was another hour of conversations that you were just telling me, and I could just sit there and listen of all these stories behind the scenes about how
And then we
some of
got
these
thrown out of the
things.
hotel.
And then we got thrown out of the hotel, so I can put that on my resume. I got kicked out of the hotel with Chris Claremont. That was a lot of fun. So yes, thank you for joining us. If you're new to comics, Chris Claremont has written. Oh my gosh,
Lots of
five
stuff.
decades, 5 decades now, right? That
you know, just getting started.
does it seem like it's been that long?
Uh, no,
No, time
no.
flies, right?
Well, theoretically, if it if the corollary to that is it flies when one's having fun, you betcha. It's it passes whether it's the best of times or the worst of times, the season of hope or the season of despair.
Mhm.
But the other weird thing is passage of time or not, I still have ideas. I still like writing. I still can't help looking at in terms of comics, looking at the characters I've worked with and created for longer than many of my editors have been around to read them. Um, and they're still fun. So, knock wood, I'll keep going.
Got another 5 more decades left in you,
I think
right?
if you mentioned that to editors at Marvel, they would pale simply because, oh, for God's sake, won't he get out of the way? And my attitude has always been no.
Good for you. Good for you. Um, so you were there. I exited comics right around the time that Onslaught happened. But when I came back into comics, you had came back to X-Men for the first time because you came back twice. Uh,
So we're
for
talking
Uncanny.
we're talking at the turn of the century.
Yes, around the 2000, 2000,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, 2000 era,
Well,
right? And to see
you
your
have
name
to
on an
allow.
X-Men title.
Well, the interesting thing was, I came back to Marvel as a boss, vice president and editorial director, and I came back with the stipulation to Bob Harris that the one book I would not write was X-Men because, well, I'd been away and the book was no longer going down the path that I had envisaged for it and that I was pursuing back in '91.
Mhm.
And I didn't want to, it had moved on to other people and I wanted to let them have their fun. And I wanted to work on other stuff. And through an accident, well, I mean, I did the Wolverine 150, was it 150 or 125? The arc there, which was fun. But the project that actually won my heart was circumstances allowing me to take over the FF when Scott Lobdell gave it up with like the second or third issue of the new relaunch. And that gave me the opportunity to work with Salvador La Roca, and
Hey, look at you
just
rolling those
have,
R's.
oh, I was in pig heaven. And I would have happily, were I given a chance, I would have happily stayed on the book for another 15 years on that book,
Yeah.
because FF was the title that actually got me into comics in the first place. It was where I fell in love with American comics, with Stan's work, with Jack's work, Stan Lee, Jack Kirby, and the concepts that they were playing out on paper. So for me, it was a childhood dream come true. Well, an adolescent dream come true. But more importantly, because of Stan and Jack's work, and because it had been through so many iterations from then on to where I came in, it didn't bother me. I had no, I didn't, it didn't bother me that I was coming in after 7 or 8 other writers, because this is my chance to play with the toys, as opposed to X-Men, where I had a lot of sad emotional baggage. So that was,
Yeah.
then
I
things got
remember.
creepy.
Well, okay, correct me if I'm wrong. And by the way, if my video is lagging a little bit, but you look clear and you sound crisp, so everything is okay. I'd rather give you all my video power to you so people can see you better. It's because they're doing some work around here, of course, on the day that I get to talk to you. But
Of course,
the sound is fine and you look good. So
my
correct
dog
me
may
if I'm wrong.
come in and be obnoxious, but there you go.
That's okay. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I remember your first Fantastic Four issue was one. It was like a two-parter, wasn't it? Was it the Coming of Galactus or something
No,
that it continued?
I closed out the last. I came in, I think, with issue 3, which closed out the first arc that uh, Alan Davis and Scott were working on.
Oh, I meant
And,
what your first comic, your first Fantastic Four issue.
oh, huh.
I remember
Um,
talking to you about this many years ago, and it was like in the middle of a story, and you were upset that you had to go and get the next issue, and then you were hooked.
you mean reading it or writing it?
Reading
Oh,
it.
oh no, that I was walking home from high school, and I walked in, and stopping by the local diner, which was a combination diner and newsagent,
Hmm.
burger shop and newsagent. Picked up a copy of FF48, which I still have, somewhat dog-eared, and read it. And I thought, huh, this stuff looks cool. What happens next? This is the FF encountering the Watcher, the setup for
Yes.
the Silver Surfer, which was in turn the setup for Galactus. So I came back a month later and got 49, which was uh, Galactus makes his entrance, and then 50, which was the FF deal with Galactus, but Johnny Storm goes off to college. So I thought, this is really cool. And then what else does Stan do with Jack? And that led me to Thor, and that led me in turn to the Avengers by Roy Thomas and John Buscema, and I was off and running.
My wife loves the fact that you dog ear stuff because I always get on her about earing my comics or my collected editions. And what are you doing? They make bookmarks now.
Well, sadly, they've been sitting in my basement on a shelf for a good long time. Let us say the better part of 6 decades, and none of this was bought for collectible reasons. They were bought because I
Right.
loved reading them, and I didn't want to throw them away. Because when I was much younger, I picked up comics that I liked, among them mostly English comics, but occasionally I would pick up an issue of Superman or whatever. And when I went off to university, my father threw them out.
Oh,
Sadly, one of those was the issue of Action where Superman reveals his secret identity to John Kennedy, which came out, I think, a week, maybe a fortnight before the assassination. So DC immediately pulled and pulped all of the copies. So if I still had that issue, I could have financed my kids' college tuition and maybe even
Oh
graduate school. But there you go.
man.
The role of parents in fate.
Well, I've learned my lesson from my parents that had thrown out or had yard sales with my comics and my toys is never to throw out anything that my daughters have.
Mm-hmm.
Um, just in case, because you never know.
Well, the irony is, my wife has now taken the position of my father and said, "You've got to get this crap out of the basement. There's just too much, and it's too It's an unforgivable clutter, and you really have to do something." And I'm, being a creative guy, my response is, "I'll get to it." Oh, I'm sorry.
Aha.
I've got a story to write. Can't get to it today. Got something else to do. Can't get to it tomorrow. So at some point, she's going to walk in with a baseball bat, and things will happen. The
Um,
role of wives in creative processing.
I like the way that you said I'm a creative guy, and that's why you don't get to it right away. Because I'm the same way, and then my wife has to hear it all the time. I'm not as creative as you, but when I'm making videos or I'm reading something for a video, like, oh yeah, I'll get to it. So it's nice to hear my hero say that. So that's awesome.
Yeah, I can say it as much as I like. That it has any effect is negligible, but that's the part of the vows that sneaks under the radar.
Right.
The obey part.
Well, I know she puts up with our stuff. So, lesson learned for people out there: don't get married.
No, lesson learned to people out there is, if you pardon the expression, keep your crap tidy.
Keep your crap tidy.
Writers
I've
are
always heard.
incredibly sloppy. Artists, no. Writers, yes. And that, but that's also why a great many writers try to, as soon as they amass any sort of decent money in the bank, find themselves somewhere other than the house to write in. I know one writer who is sort of legendary for every time he has to write a novel will go out and buy a property and live in that house for the 6 months he takes to write his next book. So he has little tracts of land all over the North America and the United Kingdom, which I
Wow,
envy.
that's a very cool way to write.
Yeah, he had a much better agent than I do. Has a much better agent than I do.
So, I saw recently that Marvel is celebrating they're doing a celebration of Chris Claremont. They they are honoring you in a comic book. It's called the Anniversary Special. Did you know about this?
Yes, the subtitle is "Not Dead Yet" with a big question mark.
No, no. We
No,
can't
it's not.
we can't even joke like that. We can't even joke like that. That would
Why
not be
not?
funny. Oh man. So, 50 years of writing comics. 50 years of creating so many characters, so many storylines that to this day are still being played out in whoever takes over the books. 17 years writing X-Men, and that's not including your returns when you
Right.
came back. And then whenever you did X-Men Forever, and you still come in from time to time. You wrote the Wolverine issue last year,
Mm-hmm.
so it's always nice to see your name on an X-Men comic. What
Thank you.
would you say for Chris Claremont? What would you say your favorite storyline was? It doesn't have to be X-Men. It can be anything that you've written.
The one I haven't written yet.
I love that answer. Yes.
It's true. I mean, to to assess a work that's already in print, it's not my job. That's your job. That's the reader's responsibility. What is your favorite issue? What storyline excites you or makes you want to come back to see what happens next, or just as legitimately pisses you off? Those are reader assessments. I'm, the thing when I was writing the book, especially when we started and it was bi-monthly, By the time we saw the mail on a particular issue, by the time we got a response, you know, I'm 6 months ahead of that. I'm far beyond that. I mean, those were the days when we had to turn in the work 2 months, 3 months ahead of publication. Um, but I'm never on the same page as the reader. So, like it or not, there's no on their perspective, there's nothing I can do about it because I'm further down the line.
Mhm.
So I am immensely flattered and immensely grateful for all the responses. And I'll have all sorts of enthusiastic discussions about what it means or what it doesn't mean. But my focus is on what's over the hill, what comes next, what idea, you know, intrigues me, piques my interest.
That
The unknown, where the books that exist are the known. That's for the readers to play with. The unknown is my property.
and I think that's a wonderful, very, very like real answer. I think that's the answer I think every creator should have. But
Well,
we have
it
a
tends
really
to
good
get
question here.
challenging to be out in public with that
Hmm.
because instead of too many times in my life, instead of paying attention to what's happening around me, instead of engaging in conversation, instead of relating to the people I'm with, my interest is caught by something behind them or something in the distance, and I'm thinking, what if blah blah blah, and I'm conjuring a story in my head. So
Hmm.
it's it's challenging on all sorts of levels. So what's this?
So this is a question from a couple people that in
Ten
chat. How
dollars?
does
Is this a $10 question or a $10
this is
answer?
this is a $10 question. You can
Okay.
give the $100 answer. But this is a question. How does Mr. Claremont feel about continuity and how new writers will sometimes come in and ignore or even scrap all the hard work they've done with characters? That that was a
Well,
I remember talking to you about this many years ago, and but I'll let you go ahead and answer that question. How do you deal with that?
especially these days, continuity is something you either pay attention to or ignore. In my case, especially relating to characters that I feel proprietary about, which sadly is most of the X-Men, are most of the X-Men, I pay no attention at all. I don't read other people's work because, with very few exceptions, for example, Walter Simonson, Stan Lee himself, um, Frank Miller, um, it's I'm not that intrigued. But the point is, if someone else is writing the X-Men, good. Have a lovely time. Not my cup of tea. Uh, Not that the X-Men are my cup of tea, but seeing what other people bring to the concept. Uh, no, I have better things to do than drive myself crazy. So I let them, they can have fun, and if and that's it. I have no, I hope they do have fun. I hope the readers have fun reading their material. But once I leave a book, I've left it.
I think that is a really good way of doing things because, gosh, I think the analogy, it's almost like it's like an ex, right? It's like you're broken up with an ex. You don't want to see who she or he is dating now. You want to move on. You got to move on with your life. And if said ex comes back and says, "Hey, come write me for another year," all right, what have you been up to for the last 2 years? But that's happened to you though, right? Like in the horrible analogy, but like in X-Men, when you were asked to come back again for Reloaded, like things had
Yes.
changed. Like Jean was dead, so you had to, you had either editors had to tell you what was going on with the X-Men, characters you couldn't use because they were quote unquote dead at the time.
Well, the other thing we did was the idea that the editors had, and I agreed with in 2000, was when I came back on the book, it was within the structure of a 6 month gap between the last issue, I guess, Well, I don't know if Scott was doing both of them. The original plan was I would take Uncanny and Scott Lobdell would write X-Men. And then
Okay.
suddenly, before we even got started, Scott decided to take another path, and Bob Harris came to me and said, you have to write both of them." But
Huh.
my point was, okay, we have a 6 month gap. Let's start with a mystery in terms of, oh, why is Nightcrawler apparently a seminarian? What are the X-Men doing in deep space? What's happening with Kitty? Who the hell are the oh god, it's been so long I can't even remember. Um,
Neo?
I created a whole raft of new villains. Um, what's going on? And my thought, I mean, at that time, I'm working with the most remarkable group of artists ever. I mean, Salva to some extent, the Kuberts. Um, it was wonderful. But as with everything I'm writing, generally, we start with a bang, and then over the next 6 months, a year, we start filling in the gaps. What's with Cecilia Reyes? Little did we know she was going to turn into an arch villainess in a movie, but there you go.
You knew that.
I read the newspapers. I look at the trailer. Haven't seen the
Right.
film yet, but that's because movies in this neck of the woods aren't open. Cinemas.
Yeah, we had to go to a drive-in to see it and drive like an hour.
Well, if there was a drive-in to see it at, I mean,
Yeah.
at this stage of the game, there's nothing within 100 miles
Oh
that's
my
open.
goodness.
I mean, to go across Long Island Sound to Connecticut and find a place, by the time we got there and back, it would have been $300+ right off the bat to go see to then pay $12 to see a movie. And
Right.
even there are very few that qualify for that expense. But the point
There's
is,
a
I,
Go ahead.
you know, we were setting off on a whole new path, and then, within 3 or 4 issues, the Marvel reality changed completely when the
How's
bankruptcy led to Ike's taking control of the company, and by extension, a new management team coming in, and Bob was out, and I was out, and end of story. So it was a sad and frustrating time, simply because, having taken all this effort to create new concepts and new characters, it all goes out the door, and I couldn't really carry them effectively over to Extreme because they didn't fit in what we were doing there. So, you try some, you don't.
Yeah. I was a big fan of Extreme, though. I'd love to see
Oh,
that omnibus
I was a big
collected.
fan of Extreme. I mean, between Salva and Igor Corday, I I had the opportunity to work with a pair of extraordinary artists and some really unexpected character moments. It was great, absolutely great.
One of my dreams is for that to be collected in omnibus format. I'm a big fan of. I think I told you that the last time we met. So you've seen you and I have
I'm sorry,
talked
there
about
was
your
another
movies.
question up there. I don't know. Is
Yeah,
that
this one here. So this is a really good question
Oh, it's only a
because
question.
you were talking about the you're being seeing your stories sometimes portrayed on film. What were your thoughts on watching them on the '90s cartoon? Did you ever get around to watching those?
Uh, not Was the '90s cartoon the second version or the first?
That would be the '90s version, not
No, no,
the
I mean
Pride of.
which there were. I remember two distinct X-Men
Yeah. So there
animated
was
series.
Pride of the X-Men, which was I think it was direct to video, and then there was the early '90s X-Men
Yeah,
that had the gold and blue team kind of costumes, and
the
a lot of kids were interested. A lot of kids were introduced
They were fun.
to X-Men in that way.
I mean, my problem is from a storytelling point of view, the Bruce Timm's work on the Batman animated series so far and away eclipses pretty much everything else I've ever seen that it's hard to draw a comparison. The I mean, I used to watch the Warner Brothers animation and Disney animation from the 30s and 40s, which was absolutely brilliant. And by comparison, contemporary cartoon anime, especially those that did a lot of their work process through studios in the Far East, suffer significantly by comparison. Um, I mean, Nelvana was brilliant, but not every studio can do that kind of work. And the other thing that to me significantly differentiated Batman, for example, and the X-Men is that the Warner Brothers anime had such an extraordinary wealth of audio talent, of voices. Well, I guess maybe it's because they used real LA actors whose voices were recognizable. And you could fill in, okay, I understand what's going on. Whereas sadly, the X-Men, while the performers themselves were good, the voices just didn't work. They didn't have that kind of instant resonance. Hang on a second, I realized my door is open and the radio is playing.
Oh, that's okay. We can chime into what you're listening to. Sorry, everybody, again for my video lag.
I've just dashed out and back. So,
oh, it's quick, like the Flash. Of course,
I try not to be a slug. But I mean, the thing is, for example, one of the questionable moments of the X-Men anime was Wolverine developing an Australian accent.
Oh, the Pride of the X-Men. Yeah, I remember that.
I mean, for me, it's like, guys, he's Canadian. You're all Canadian. What's the problem here? You know, I mean, Hugh Jackman, who is Australian, faked a fairly good Canadian accent. So why can't you do the reverse?
I love the irony in that, right? Pride of the X-Men that came out, when was that? 1980... I want to say 80... Was it 87, 80? It was direct-to-video, right? And it did have an Australian actor playing the role of Wolverine. Like,
yeah, but he sounded
and he was an Australian accent. And then an Australian actor got the role of Wolverine. I love the irony, and turned out to be one of the best things that happened to the character outside of you.
It's not irony, it's a mistake. And that, I think, is... In a lot of cases, a lot of the production companies that were doing X-Men were, at least from my view as audience, less conscientious than they should have been. And, you know, I don't think it was intentional, but sometimes the cards, when the cards are shuffled and dealt, they don't come up, you know, they come up snake eyes. How's that for mixing bad metaphors? But if you're going to make any kind of adaptation of any kind of product, the first thing one has to do is sit down and try to determine what is the core of each character and how to make them interact. And I think that one of the significant differences between the Marvel Marvel films, whether it's Marvel Studios or even the Fox X-Men productions, the differentiation between them and a number of the Warner attempts to bring the DC canon to life are that Marvel Studios have dealt with their their films, their characters in terms of casting, in terms of script, far more conscientiously, and from an audience standpoint, far more effectively than other studios have. And that, to me, is the way it should be. If one is going to adapt War and Peace, if one's going to adapt Treasure of the Sierra Madre, you want it to be a visual presentation of what the author of that work had in mind. And once you get that, everything falls into place. Sometimes you have in with studios the view, well, these are comic books, who the hell cares? Which is an unfair dismissal of both the genre as a whole, but the specific works that are being presented, adapted, whatever, at the same time, because it diminishes the approach, the conscientious attitude of the original writers to the work, and
Mhm.
you know, it's yielding to a prejudice that should not exist in the first place.
I understand. Let's see. I've been following, um, but I see what you're saying. Like you and I talked about the portrayal of Jean and Wolverine and Cyclops in the movies, right? And there's certain things that the movies got right that and then there are other things that the movies didn't get right. But it's really difficult to do these stories justice when I can't imagine what it feels like being the creator of these stories, right? I'm a fan, so these stories mean the world to me. So to see them try to do the Dark Phoenix saga justice twice now, the
Should not
animated
happen.
show, the animated show did actually the animated show did it pretty good considering what the characters they had to work with,
Oh no,
but
I totally agree. But the other side of it's not. But see, I don't think it's. This sounds very superficial, but it's really not that hard. Why? Well, how can I say that? Because I watched um, the pro. Damn, I can't believe it. Uh, oh, I
it's
love
okay.
having a total
Is it a
brain fart here. Um, TV series Scott's son Proteus? No, Madeline David Haller
Legion?
Legion.
Hmm.
Pardon me, I gotta go shove my head through the wall.
No, no, don't. You're being so hard on yourself.
But 3 seasons. That
Hmm.
series lasted for 3 seasons, and each one was better than the one before. It created a character that you wanted to know. Holy cow! What happens next? Where has he gone? What's happening to him? What's happening to the people around him? It was well produced and more to the point. Well produced, well performed, but at its foundation, extremely, extraordinarily well written. And that's all it takes is someone to sit down, look at a series, look at the characters, and think,
Hmm.
I can do something with this. I, the other thing that made it absolutely kick ass was that in the top 4 credits, there was me and Bill Sienkiewicz.
Yeah.
A credit as big and as the writer, the director, the producer. It's like, holy cow, we're finally where we're supposed to be, as opposed to these itty bitty tiny credit lines at the bottom of the final crawl when everybody's heading for the door.
Not anymore. People stay for the after credits now, Chris.
Well, because they're waiting to see the,
Yeah,
the trailer that's coming next or the teaser
yeah,
that's
but
coming.
I get it. I think, and I know they misspelled Bob McLeod's last name, but like the same thing happened in New Mutants.
Oh
God, they
yeah,
only had 3 years to fix that. We have another question here. Thank you so much,
okay.
Shane. This is a With some exceptions, modern political, social messaging in comics seems to lack an authenticity that you brought to the page. Is there any advice that you have?
Um, I guess write what you know. I mean, a lot of the social political aspect of it came because I myself am off the boat. My father, we emigrated here when I was young, and the way I tell the story, which is true, is the first day of elementary school. I walked into school dressed as I would if I were going to the equivalent English school. So there I am in knee socks and shorts and a shirt and tie and a sweater and a blazer. Very proper. And I came home with a bloody nose and a black eye and never wore that uniform or anything like it again.
Just because of the
From
clothes you were wearing, or your
I was
was it
no, I
your
was an outsider. I didn't,
yeah?
I was from somewhere else, and a lot of times in school, regardless of grades, there is a tendency to pick on the stranger. You're not from around here. You're not one of us. You are, for want of a better term, an alien. Ooh, what's another word for alien? Mutant. What's another word for mutant? Well, an outsider. Outsiders could be gay. They could be transgender. They could be black. They could be Islam, Muslims. Oh, wait, they could be Mormons. You know, it's uh, the irony is, well, I was flying back to New York from a gig in LA, and for some insane reason, I ended up at the back of the bus. Now, I don't know any of you remember 747s, which were really big buses.
Hmm.
If you're in the back of the bus, you're in a row, 10 seats across, and hardly any room between the rows. So I'm sitting there, and I'm surrounded by young Mormon gentlemen who are off to do their missionary 2 years. So this is a long time ago in a galaxy far away. So I had long hair, and I was dressed kind of, oh, out of the norm, let us say. And I'm surrounded by all these guys with short hair, neatly cut, white shirts, dark ties, dark pants, wearing ID tags. And I'm thinking, this is creepy. Well, what did I do? Well, I pulled out pages and started working. So we're flying, and I'm suddenly thinking, these guys are looking at me. I'm in the middle of the row. There's no way I can get to the aisle and run for it. What's going to happen next? And this young man says, "Excuse me, sir." Yes. What are you doing? Oh, I'm one of those pages, comic book pages. Oh, sir? Yes. What are you doing? I'm writing them. Oh, sir? Yes. Are those the X-Men? I look. He looks. Yes. Long pause. Sir? Yes. Are you? Are you? Are you Chris Claremont? Oh, and I said, yes. Sir? Yes. Would you like a brownie? My mom made them for us. Oh, okay. And that was it. We were chatting for the next hour and a half. They were fans,
That's
you know,
amazing.
because, I mean, you'd be surprised at the number of Mormons who are X-Men fans. Why? Because the X-Men represent people who were hounded because of their beliefs, because of who they were. Well, that's an essential part of the Mormon tradition. That's why they got driven all the way across the continent to Utah. And it you'd be surprised at who the concept of being feared and hated by the world you've sworn to protect, it impacts on a lot of people who you wouldn't normally expect, yet it does. And from my perspective, I love the fact that everybody's reading it, but by the same token, it comes with an attached level of responsibility that says if these people are going to invest that much legitimate, honest affection for the characters and the stories, then that requires the writer to respond in time and give them characters and stories that justify that faith, which is not what most people expect from a comic book. But at the same time, it allows the opportunity to use those stories and those characters to maybe bridge a gap, to do a story about a mutant trying to fit in and not succeeding, or succeeding. One step forward, two steps back, 15 side to side, sort of thing. It provides opportunity. And that's something you, as a writer, that's a gift that it's an unparalleled gift. And you have to treat it with respect and treat the people with respect, toss out more stories that will keep bringing them back and satisfying them. In another instance, I was at I was at a dead dog party, and there's this young woman who's in tears, and I'm trying, what's wrong? Well, she was a Mormon, and she loved the X-Men, but of course she was married, and while her husband was totally willing to indulge her her this idiosyncrasy in her personality, while their children were too young, they were now becoming of an age when they could read, when they were no longer, when they could be affected, let us say, by the wife's affectation. And his diktat to her was, you have to give it up for the sake of our kids. And she was prepared to do that, but it was breaking her heart. And on one side of my head, there's the solipsistic, oh my God, I've got another one, whoopee! Fan, it's a writer reacting to a fan, a legitimate fan, and saying, oh, that's what we all wish for, a reader with that kind of passion. But on the other side of my head is like, oh my God, he's breaking her heart. I mean, that's not fair. He should, A, give the book a chance, take a look at it himself, and maybe get seduced as well. But B, why couldn't he be more tolerant? That's a conflict in me, but it represents the conflict in that person, that family, that couple. To provoke that kind of passion, again, as I said, you have to treat it with responsibility. You have to provide. If I've done the stories and characters that brought us to this position, I have to keep going down that path, except I have to make them better. So,
I think you over you you overachieve that in your stories to make them better. I mean, they're a staple of comics, not just X-Men. Not they're literature. They're my favorite. Not just me. I know I am not alone when I say they are the best thing that I have ever read in my life. I don't care if it's comics or books. It's literally the best thing I've ever read. I came to this country not knowing a word of English, and that was in 1987. And I tell this story. I know my viewers know this story, but my first comic book was Uncanny X-Men 168, which is the first appearance of Madeline Pryor. I didn't know anything going on in that book other than the pictures. I followed the pictures. Reading comic books at a young age, when I started buying them here in America, or my mom and dad did rather, or my uncles, helped me learn the language and help me make friends. Because I was put into, much like you, I would get into fights because I didn't know the language. I was The nuns thought it would be a good idea to put me into a private school of rich folks. My family didn't have a nickel to them. And so my clothes were all beaten down, or they weren't even hand me downs. They were hand me downs, and I would get into fights because that was the language that I understood when
Hmm.
people were laughing at me and picking on me. If it So to feel like an outsider, and I know I am not alone here, going home and looking forward to reading those books, there there's it was like I found another family, right? Not that my family was bad, my family's amazing, but it was like I found people like me that were not liked for the way that they looked, right? And you help make me who I am today. Your stories that and I know you hear that a lot, but I am the person I am today because of those stories. I can quote so many of these stories that you wrote. And so when you say you try to do your readers justice, you did. You more than did, and we can't and that's why you have such a strong following. Like
But
that's why
that's
you have lines waiting for you at conventions.
but I think that's for me. That's what I want to see when I go to the movies. I want to see the the presentation on screen to equal, if not transcend, what I put on the paper. I mean, there's a moment when we were at the premiere back in 2000 of X-Men, when Hugh Jackman's driving his truck down the road, and Anna Paquin looks up at him and says, "Does it hurt?" And we know what she's talking about, and he looks out the front, the glass, through the windshield, and then he looks down at his hand, and then he looks at her, and then he looks out front, and he just says, in this very Hugh Jackman way, "Every time." And we're sitting at the premiere, for crying out loud. The whole cast is in the room, and the next thing I know, I'm on my feet going, "Yes!" And my wife's like elbowing me in the hip and saying, "Get that, sit down. You're making a fool of yourself." Because for me, that's that's his character, all rolled up in one word. And it was, aside from the fact it's my word from the book, but
Right.
but the point is that when you have an actor of Hugh Jackman's capability, who can project a multiple level of response, anger, grief, whatever, pain, to that question, then you sit there as the audience, and it is very much like a gut punch. It's a human, you relate to him as a person. In a comic, you can relate to the image, you can relate to the words. In prose, you read a paragraph or a page of text, and it will come through your imagination. But on a film, it's boom, right there.
Mhm.
Uh, and that's something I wanted more, and I wanted to see more and more in the films, to see the characters properly brought to life. And it sometimes it works brilliantly, sometimes not so much. So you keep trying till you get it right. But again, going back to the Marvel side of the equation, the moments in Last Stand, Infinity Wars, the last Avengers movie,
Endgame.
Endgame. Sorry, all the various iterations of the title.
Yeah.
The moments that last, that hit me, are the beginning, which is Hawkeye's Clint Barton suddenly realizing, where'd my family go? The moment that he and Natasha are hanging there off the cliff, and she's saying, let me go," and he's trying desperately to hold on because they're best friends, and he doesn't want to let her die. And at the end, when Tony realizes what the 1 in 20 million chance is and what it's going to cost, because you've already seen in the first act, I've got a family, I've got a daughter, I have
Mhm.
something to fight for, something to lose, and yet every step leads him to that point. And then, you know, well, I'm Iron Man. Boom. And he saves the universe. But there's a price. And that, I think, is a legitimate, heroic, cinematic moment that, you know, it it worked. And it's a tribute to the film, it's a tribute to Robert Downey Jr. But there you go. That's what films can and should do. That's what stories can and should do. And the difference is between Avengers, the movies, and a new of the X-Men is that took, what, 3 years to film? And more stars than there are in the sky, to use a cliche. Oh, yes, and it cost $500 million. Whereas by
You s-
contrast, I can sit down with Salva, do the same thing in 30 days, or if we're rushing, 2 weeks, for, a couple of grand, depending on, who gets paid. And bingo, there you are. Everything that's on the film, he and I can do on a page. We can create characters you fall in love with. We can create dramatic situations. We can create kick-ass visuals, and we can do it again in 30 days.
you
More
you
importantly, though,
go ahead.
doing it interacts with the reader's imagination. Because for every, a standard comic has maybe 100 panels and it's 20 pages,
Mhm.
100 images, 100 visuals. Uh, but for the readers, the space that matters, the space that truly brings us all to life, are the gaps between the panels. Why? Because that's where the reader's imagination kicks in. What's happening between this image you see? Comics are shorthand. You read them, boom, you have the overview with some specifics of the story. But what happens in the other space, the space between those moments? Well, that's where the audience comes in. That's where your imagination comes in. That's where you can think, well, you know, Kurt's doing this, or Aurora's doing that, or what really happened on this date? Is Scott as big of an asshole as he acts? No, he's not. He's the
He's a
problem is
complex character.
he is a complex character.
Absolutely.
He and his brother were thrown out of a plane when they were kids, and his chute caught fire on the way down, and he acted to save his brother, to save Alex, but as a result, he's brain damaged. That's why his optic blasts aren't controllable. I mean, in a normal course of events, he could control it with his will. Sometimes they would blast, sometimes they wouldn't. Now he can't turn them off, so he's always got to wear his glasses. That he is conscious from moment one that he has lost everything, everything, which is why his getting married was such a seminal moment, because he had finally got to a point, he had met the woman of his dreams, and after dancing around the issue for a year, he proposed. Okay, they're standing on the deck of a starship looking at Earth from high orbit, And it's like she's, very impressed. But Scott was taking what I envisaged as the next step of his life. The step that said, I've I've had enough of wearing skin tight suits and working at a school for gifted youngsters, saving the world, if not the universe. It's time for me to move on with real life. What is real life? Meeting the woman you love, starting a family, getting a job, moving ahead. And yeah, he'd be available in emergencies because he's Scott. Heck, if things, if life demanded it, X Factor came into being, he would come back. He's not a fool. For him, it's re-upping. Just like, if you're in the reserves and you get called up for a deployment. But imagine if X Factor had been Scott and Madeline and Nathan coming back. Scott becoming the Professor Xavier of that team, rather than Scott walking out on his family to
I remember.
pick up with his old girlfriend. I mean,
Ooh,
and
yeah.
what I
I
think
remember when
found
you told
most
me your original pitch for that for X Factor
yeah,
because you did not like the idea of Jean Grey coming back, and I love the idea of using Sarah, right, Jean's sister,
yeah,
too. You
Jean's
were going to
sister.
throw Sarah in there as the other mutant.
But think about it. In a course of 5 pages, Scott's character was irreparably destroyed. Because how can a hero do something as callous and unthinking and unforgivable as walking out on his wife and baby? I mean, what does that tell your readers? For his old girlfriend. I mean,
Yeah,
that's why Weezy and I spent the next 3 years trying to at least find a balance there. But it this is for me anyway as a writer, and I fully concede I'm a different writer from the guys who worked on X Factor, and they felt just as passionately that the death of Gene was a mistake, and they wanted to fix it. But and I had no problem with them fixing it. Well, I had a lot of problems with them fixing it, but to fix it and just return everything to the the original status quo ignores so many other, even more interesting dramatic possibilities. Um, it's. I think it's a case where I apologize for just ranting on this,
no, no,
but it's just
please
the point
don't.
is to look at a potentially dramatic situation and think, how can I make this better? How can I make not better in the sense of fix it, but better in the sense of what would be cool drama.
Yeah, well, there was a
And
lot during that time.
but that's it. I mean, comics are melodrama. Comics are finding the the core dramatic moment and turning it upside down and inside out of what works and what doesn't. I mean, this this is me being totally self-indulgent, but I had this insane idea when they were talking about Batman marrying Catwoman, and I thought, okay, so Catwoman and Harley have it's the bridal shower, and Harley's gathered up every badass bad babe in the DC universe to celebrate.
Hmm.
And of course, if one is Lois Lane, Pulitzer-winning reporter for the Daily Planet, is she going to pass up an opportunity like this? No, she wants to crash the party. So she shows up, and Catwoman looks at Harley, and Harley looks at Catwoman, and all the bad girls descend on Lois. And the next thing Lois knows is that they have reconstructed her clothes and makeup so that she is now an even scarier badass than Harley. Tattoos everywhere, just incredibly un incredibly just enticing. And it's the party goes on all night, and finally it comes to an end, and everybody, you know, gets ready to go home, and Lois suddenly looks at Harley and Catwoman, Harley and Selina, and says, "Hey, guys, this stuff comes off, right?" And Harley looks at Selina, and Selina looks at Harley, and they go, "Oh, no." And suddenly Lois's face changes because there was more to what happened to her than just makeup. And her her personality is replaced. Lois Lane becomes little Lola. And whatever Lola wants, Lola gets. And little Superman, Lola wants you. And from that moment on, at least for the life of this miniseries or whatever, Lois would become the deadliest badass supervillain DC has ever seen. Little Lola. So sneaky, vicious, deadly, well, you name it. Even Batman can't figure out who she is. Superman can't find her. She's hiding in plain sight in the secret identity of Lois Lane. So for me, that's the kind of, if you're going to do something silly like that, if you're going to jump off the cliff, jump off the cliff. If you're going to do something horrid to a hero, or you give yourself an end game, but make what you do so outrageous that the readers can't help but fall in love. So that when you want to fix things, you'll get. I mean, this is what happened to me when I came back, and I was doing the Wolverine stories. The first thing I wanted to do, because I was so pissed off that Kitty had suddenly become 23 so she could jump into bed with Pete Wisdom. I wanted
Oh,
to.
right. That was after the Ellis's Excalibur. So
Yep.
yeah.
Aside from the fact that if you age Kitty 5 years, or 6 years, then you've got to age everybody 6 years, which means Franklin is now in middle school. And if you haven't done that, then Marvel continuity just goes out the window. Because that was the one significant difference between Marvel and DC, seminal difference between Marvel and DC, is that our books were connected. The lives are connected. We all existed in the same place in time. Whereas in DC, you could have a different reality in Gotham, different reality in Metropolis, different reality in Star City or Central City or whatever.
Mhm.
So I tried to fix it. And the readers just dropped on me like a meteor, a very large meteor, saying, "How dare you?" At which point I just said, "Okay, fuck it. I can't fix it. We're stuck with this." But this is sort of what I meant in terms of what Stan used to say. You write the book, you do a book for as long as you do a book, but then you put it back where you found it, and ideally the way you found it. So the next person can have a relatively clean slate to deal with, or not, but at least they have the option. So, no matter how smart or gifted or whatever one thinks one is, there's always this slippery patch of road where you can end up flat on your ass. Or as I saw in, yeah, I mean, you've got to know what you're doing. And even when you do, you've got to watch out for slippery slopes.
I think for you it was you and I have talked about this, and I know at conventions you've talked about this. The reality of when it hits you about letting these characters go for the first time after your run of an X-Men. Um, that's a big lesson to learn for a lot of writers too, especially new writers that are into the game. That these characters eventually will have to go back in the toy box, and someone else has to come and play with them.
Yeah.
And
I think the prime difference is that most people only take over or only are on a book for a fairly limited amount of time, whether it's a year, 2 years, 3 years. Rarely, very rarely, do you have someone insane enough to stick around for almost 2 decades. But I
it's
mean,
a rarity these days.
hmm? I'm sorry?
So it is a rarity these days.
Well, yes, it is. And it's a rarity on the part of the publishers as well as much as the writers, because it's easier to manage, I guess. I don't know. Um, I think that the other challenge is the books are much less individual than they used to be. There's too much of an emphasis at both companies on having huge events where, you know, story, or I guess the Uber story is integrated between 6 or 7 or 8 different titles, to the extent where you print a table of contents almost, where you read how everything integrates across 7 titles and 3 months and whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I, you know, I understand that that might be a more, I don't know, popular way of doing things, a more lucrative way of doing things. But for me, I want to read, if I'm reading Alan Moore's vision of Watchmen or of Superman, I want to read Alan Moore. I don't want to read Alan Moore and then the next week read, uh, even if it's Wheezy Simonson's take on what Alan Moore started, and then she goes on to, I don't know, uh, Len Wein's take on her stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Because if I want to follow Wheezy's work or Alan's work or Len's work on their own, I want to see where they take the characters, how they envisage the characters, what is unique about the characters, not part of chapters of a huge novel.
Yeah, and I think as the publishers, that's kind of what they do, right? It's they get you hooked. You want to keep reading these stories, well, then you have to buy this book and then follow their adventures in this other crossover that's happening next year and that crossover. But that honestly has been going on for a long time. That's
Well, I've
why
been
I think.
disagreeing with it for a long time.
Well, absolutely. You're not the only writer that has. I mean, there are a lot of writers that have said, "Oh gosh." I mean, there's writers that have quit. Writers that are like, "I can't write. I can't write X Factor. There's too many." I remember talking to Peter David. The reason he left X Factor the first time, it was because it was one crossover after another.
Mm-hmm.
Even though, unfortunately, he did say that his books sold better when they were part of a crossover.
Oh yeah, but
And
you don't have a
if
chance to develop the character. You don't have a chance
exactly,
to
or
develop
the story arcs.
voice.
Yeah, or the story arcs that you want to develop. We have a couple of super chats. I'm sorry, I haven't had the chance to. They're just appreciating their love for you from Hip Hop
Oh,
Happens, and then from Undead, saying that your X-Men is his favorite literary work besides Tolkien's Lord of the Rings. So you're up there with Tolkien. Look at that. Hobbit, Magneto Black was awesome. There's a gentleman, Daniel HDR. Let me see if I can find it really quick. And I'll come back to this question because that's an excellent question from DBZ All Stars. Chris, please tell the audience about your travels here to Brazil to sign with me in a convention and all that incident at the airport and the funny idea to our Nightcrawler annual. Miss you, buddy.
Daniel's an artist from Brazil, and we
Mm-hmm.
worked together on a number of projects. Nightcrawler annual. What the hell was it? I have no idea.
I think. Well, I don't know. I don't know what your idea was.
Well, that makes two of us. Um, Well, no, because the thing is, Nightcrawler, there's so many interesting possibilities. I like him too much as a character because I mean, this is the thing. Len's original concept of Nightcrawler was that he was the usual haunted, tormented demon.
Hmm.
You know, his character was defined by the way he looked. And Dave Cockrum and I both, neither of us were thrilled by that because it's exactly what the reader expects. You know, if you're presenting a cliche and the person is the exemplar of the cliche, what's the point? Whereas when we talked about it, the thought occurred to me, unlike all the other characters whose powers kicked in when they were at puberty, Nightcrawler looked like this from the day he was born. I mean, maybe the teleporting didn't kick in till he was 13, but the way he looked is the way he looked. And so the next question for me was, well, how does he feel about that? And the answer we came down to is Nightcrawler is a man of, or a boy, and then a man of faith. So the question and then the answer is, why do I look this way? Well, because God decided you should look this way. And then what? Well, if God decided I should look this way, who am I to argue with God? Okay, then what? Well, if God wants me to look this way, why should I act like the way I look? Why can't I be a decent, happy human being? Why can't I pay attention to the Sermon on the Mount and do unto others as I would have others do unto me? So he actually turns out to be the most religious of the team, but
Yes.
B,
Yeah.
the person who tries to live his life according to those precepts. And Errol Flynn movies, of course,
The
for swordplay.
the beauty
And
and the growth
that
to
what about
Nightcrawler was that
hmm?
he changed. You made Nightcrawler this character that um, refused to use the image inducer, so he
Well,
didn't have to
Wolverine.
hide who he was, right? Like Wolverine,
Well,
there was there was that story with Wolverine, and I think there's so much growth in that character from the moment that he appeared. But that's what you did, like
but that was the
with
point.
Kitty,
Like,
with Storm, with and sometimes these characters regress when somebody else comes on board, and I hate that, right? I hate that because it's like it took so many years for these characters to get where they are, and snap of a finger, it's like they've regressed back to who they used to be. That's why a
well, the
lot of
smug
people have a
answer.
misunderstanding of Scott, right? People
Well,
are
the
like, "Oh,
smug.
Scott's an asshole," but they just don't understand him.
Well, that this, as I was starting to say, the smug answer is that's why I'm me and they're not.
Right.
But no, I
You,
mean the thing with Nightcrawler is he can be totally conflicted. I mean, the woman he loves, um, ah, oh for God's sakes,
Amanda?
Amanda Sefton.
Hmm.
He loves her
I got you,
passionately.
Chris.
What is she? She's a demon sorceress. Well, but she's a hero. Except there's a problem. She's not the only person he loves. Because 2 years ago, 3 years ago, I introduced, well, years and years ago, I introduced Bloody Bess,
Hmm.
who is I guess one could call her the Betsy Braddock of Earth One. But more importantly, she's a stone psychotic killer. But Nightcrawler loves her just as passionately as as Amanda. Talk about a conflict. What do you do if, I mean, when I was writing the X-Men or writing this whole situation, Amanda was up in, I think, heaven defending the forces of good against the forces of evil. So that left an opening for Bess. But how do you? I mean, this is something I played with in Todd Noakes and my Nightcrawler series.
Hmm.
What do you do if you find a person that you love and she's a psychotic killer? She'll do hero things every now and then, but at bedrock, she's crazy. And I think the last issue 12 has a discussion to that effect where either Psylocke or Betsy are talking to him about it. What are you going to do? And he says, I have no idea, but I can't just walk away. So I kind of like that potential conflict, simply because he's a hero and he takes it seriously. So if my girlfriend is a psychotic killer, I've got to find a way to either get her off the dark side or bring her to justice. But I'll still love her. Oh, the tangled webs we weave. I mean, the whole thing, the whole point for me with uh, the long running relationship between Aurora and oh
Forge
yeah,
or okay.
no, Forge.
Okay, I didn't want to put words in your mouth. I just
No, no,
know
that's fine. My
who
brain
I
is
always I
you
always
have a
thought.
functional brain and presumably a computer with notes. But where do we go with that? I mean, the problem also here is that you have to balance the reality of an ongoing series with the temptation to indulge in having a relationship with another person. The only real romantic relationship at Marvel that has survived and worked is Reed and Sue. Every other marriage has crashed and burned
Yes.
because the problem you come up with is that once someone's married, they're off the table. And you go back to the basic question is, why do people get married? Well, to live happily ever after. What does that mean? Well, somebody's got to get pregnant and have a family. But how do you raise a family if you're a superhero? If Mary Jane got pregnant, whoops, she got pregnant.
Yeah,
How
they
does
did that
Peter
too.
deal with that? I mean, again, you've got to have a point where real life. I mean, the difference between Marvel and DC has always been real life. I mean, DC, most of their heroes are millionaires. You know, um, Green Arrow is a millionaire. Green Lantern
Nightcrawler.
is an intergalactic cop. Batman has more money than everybody. Um, Clark Kent is a reporter for a great metropolitan newspaper, so he's taken care of. Okay, Barry Allen's a police forensic um, examiner, but the number of people who actually need a job are limited. Whereas at Marvel, everybody except Tony Stark is in that position. Don Blake was a doctor. Peter Parker is always struggling to find a way to pay the rent. Um, Reed and the FF went bankrupt at least 3 times that I can remember. Um, Tony Stark, okay, he's rich. But you've got a school for gifted youngsters, which again is great if it's only got 7 or 8 students.
Hmm.
But the minute it becomes the Jean Grey school with at least 100 students, if the comic looks like the movie, if it's not it's not a secret. So you're going to tell me that a school for gifted mutants exists 35 miles outside of Manhattan, above Manhattan, and Homeland isn't involved? The New York State Department of Education isn't involved. APW isn't involved. Um, there are so many real world problems that suddenly arise once everything goes public. Um, Here's a simple question: are all the students in the school orphans? Are they abandoned? Do they have families? If if someone walks up and says, "Hi, you have this special gift that automatically allows you to be a citizen of our equivalent of Israel," cool, but you can't ever go home again. What does that mean? You know, do I have to go by myself, or can I bring my parents? No, you can't bring your parents. They're not mutants. You know, that that's it gets complicated, and it gets complicated really fast.
Yeah.
And if you're going to do something like that, you have to find a way to deal with it in terms that relate to the audience, that the audience can understand. They can agree, they can disagree, but they've got to understand. If you're going to do stories, they've got to be about people. Ideally, the confrontations between good and bad grow out of the interactions of people, but it shouldn't be, "I have an evil plan. I will execute my evil plan, and someone will try to stop me." Well, it's like, yeah, why don't you just do a thing where I'm walking down the street, I want to go have I want to have a burger. Me and Logan are going to go have a burger. Ah, wait, Scott and Logan and Kurt are going to go have a talk because, sorry, Colossus
Pete.
and
Yeah. I
Kurt.
knew you were going to go with that story.
Yeah, well, no, but the point is, because Colossus is acting, Peter is acting like an asshole, and
Yeah.
Logan's going to call him on it. But while they're doing that, in walks Juggernaut, and a fight starts. And Nightcrawler sensibly says, "Shouldn't we help?" And Logan says, "No, they're
No.
both big boys. Neither of them is going to hurt each other. The place has been, evacuated. There's no one else here to get hurt on. We'll sit here and watch." But it's about character. It's not about event. Event is less crucial to the story. It's the MacGuffin, but the fact is it's about who these people are. And to me, those are the stories that I remember. Those are not just in mine, but it's like the story, Stan's stories, Roy's stories, anybody's stories. They're about character. And the minute you lose that, you've lost something absolutely crucial to the process. You're asking a reader to spend $5 to buy the damn book and then spend hopefully 20 minutes to sit there reading it. You want them to get to the end of that process and think, wow, this is worth it. If I'm going to wait 2 years now for the next Bond movie, which from its trailers looks really good, I want a payoff. I mean, if for no other reason, holy cow, Daniel Craig is having stunts around real buildings. They're not CGI. That's incredible.
Oh yeah, I can't. I'm so upset that got pushed back, but I completely get it. I get
No,
why all these movies are pushed back.
Just look at all the shit that's happening with Mulan. Hey, you can pay $30 to watch Mulan on TV.
Or you can wait 2 months to watch it free on Disney Plus, which they probably shouldn't have mentioned. That was so weird for the studio to do that.
Yeah, but if I had a 1,000-foot or 1,000-inch TV on my wall, it would be fun.
Oh, right.
To watch it on my iPad or my TV,
yeah.
I'm sure that's not what anybody planned when they started. I mean, hell, I'll just go back and watch the animated one. But the same thing, that's...
It's got Mushu in it.
I don't want to see Wonder Woman at this stage of the game on my TV. I want to see it in the movie theater. I want the experience with other people. I want the experience of being gobsmacked by this vast, widescreen, holy cow.
Oh yeah, I love going to the theater because I think it is probably one of the last places that I can completely lose myself.
Yeah.
Because even watching movies at home, and I know this isn't you, but even watching movies at home, I still get lost. My phone vibrates. Oh, I got a call, or I got an email coming in. But in the movie theater, it's the one place I can actually put things down, and I miss that. I miss going there. You know, the drive-in is it is very much like being at home almost.
Well, drive-ins
Here,
are cool in their own way. It's
yeah,
it's just
but at least they're coming
yes,
back
you're
with this.
absolutely right. I mean, watching Star Wars, the first, episode 4,
Mhm.
the first one, that moment when, you know, Leah's ship goes zipping by, and then suddenly the Star Destroyer just keeps going and going and going and going, and it's like, holy cow. You know, watching Space Odyssey is so incredibly different on a 70 millimeter widescreen than it is
Oh yes,
on my
yes.
my 40-inch TV because I'm bigger than the TV. Whereas in the cinema, it's like, whoa, and that's what I'm saying. It's like the way the 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 means of information conveyance of the information defines the experience. Seeing something on a movie screen is so much different than reading it in a comic book. Why? Because you have action, you have the impact, the embrace of music, of visual, of of real people on the screen, and yet the comic can give you something else. Can give you a depth, can give you a perspective, can give you insight into who these people are, can make you care in more than 5 seconds of time. It gives you the opportunity in in both the visual and the text that goes with it. Darth Vader walks through the door. Huh, he's pretty scary. But what are you relating to? Well, you're mostly relating to James Earl Jones's voice, which is brilliant.
Oh yeah.
But imagine if you're reading a comic, you suddenly get thought balloons or captions that take you behind the mask. What does that mean? What can that do? Well, it can do a whole lot if you do it right. That's what I say. It's different. I mean, the other thing with film is once the credit starts rolling, once you see the Fox logo, you can't see it anymore since Fox doesn't exist. Once you see the Disney logo, you know, once you see the Warner Brothers logo, you're stuck for 2 hours. You're stuck. You can't get out. I mean, I
Right.
did when I was watching Avengers, but that's because the movie was too damn long. Uh, no, you
Some
can't
argue
put it on. You
that it could
can't
be
put it on
longer.
hold. Yeah, well, it will be when it comes out on DVD. But you can't. You're stuck in at the movie's pace until it's over. Whereas if I'm reading a comic book, I can read it, and then I can go back and read it again, or I can wait a minute. This relates to this page. Oh my God, I didn't see that happen. They're different ways of conveying information. Each is potentially as rich as the other or more rich than the other, but they're different. And the difference provides levels of insight, provides levels of excitement. You just got to find a way to do it in a way that, as always, leaves the reader on the edge of their seat and wanting to come back desperately to see what happens next. And that's fortunately where the X-Men lived for the better part of a decade,
Yeah.
and where ideally it should live today, but not my department.
So speaking of today,
You have to see the progression of
are you
equality.
are you happy to see the progression of equality featured in comics these days, such as Mystique and Destiny being married and Kitty Pryde being bisexual? Um, were there
What?
because I know
What do you mean Kitty
oh man,
Pryde being bisexual?
spoilers.
Where did that come from?
That's in it's in the
No, I
current
know.
Marauder series. Since you're not reading it, but I know
I
for a
think
fact that
I
there were
think
stories you
no,
couldn't
no,
tell
no. I
because of
think I
editorial.
actually
But go
think,
ahead.
if I could, sorry, running over you.
No, 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 no. I'm
I
running over you.
think that magic cast a spell. Ilyana did something. Dum 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 dum. Well, the thing is, I mean, the other seminal difference is that my first run on the X-Men was entirely under the Comics Code authority. And the thing with the Comics Code was there are certain things you can do,
Yeah.
and there's a whole lot more that you can't do. But you know what happened? You know the way that we all dealt with this? You found better ways of telling a story. You found ways to hint at a moment, not explain it with detail. It's back in those days, what happened, but this is what I was saying before, what happened between the panels was or more often than not, more essential than what happened on the panel, because that's where the reader's imagination comes into play. If you throw out lots of hints about a relationship between uh, Mystique and Destiny, we never really said anything. It's just they're always together and they relate to each other in a way that does not suggest they are just good friends.
Yeah.
But we never actually say, or they're gay. Because, yeah. Oh, hi.
Are you being recorded?
Yes.
No, like live?
Yes.
Oh.
Hi. Sorry.
Hi. It's okay.
Yeah.
I
What?
need your
That's how,
Okay.
that's how you know it's live.
Bye bye. No, but the thing is, sorry, we never actually said these characters are gay. They're lesbians. Well,
Hmm.
partly that because the term is fungible when one of the characters, i.e., Mystique, is a top to bottom, inside and out shapeshifter.
Right.
So the definition of gender for her is fungible, to say the least. But my way of thinking of it is it's none of your damn business. They are who they are. Figure it out for yourself. And you can either choose to do it, or you could miss it when you're 12 and realize it when you're 20 or 30. But it's there. It's a reality. But because it's a reality, we don't need to say it with big letters. It is. Um, the thing with Kitty,
I
it's
think people have been wanting that since the days of New Mutants for some reason. I had no
what?
idea. My brother being one of them, I had no idea
What, you
people have
wanted
been
her to be
wanting
gay?
Kitty and Magic for some reason. Something about the Rasputin line. I don't know. My brother was all
Yeah,
he was like,
except
"You
that,
haven't heard about this?"
yeah, but that's like, oh, what, you can't have my brother, you have me instead.
I don't know. I never saw
Well,
that. Like, but a lot
I
of people did.
never trust anybody named Rasputin. But see, for me, it's like the the primal relationship in Kitty's life was in True Friends when she and Rachel went back to 1936 and
Mhm.
had their adventure then. And Kitty met a young guy that she fell hook, line, and sinker for. And if she hadn't, she'd stayed there, they would have been married and lived happily ever after. But she came back to the present and discovered that he died during the war. I've always known where Kitty is going in this respect,
Mhm.
and I've left more than enough hints in X-Men: The End where you see
Yeah.
Kitty as president, and yes, she is the first president, something that is the first, but she's not the first gay president, and probably not the first woman president. Fill in the box yourself. Oh, the fact that her eldest daughter is a redhead, you can construe whatever you like. But again, this is the advantage of what happens off panel, off camera, off stage. One person might argue that's just being cowardly.
Hmm.
My counter is, again, it's none of your damn business. Um, I know how the story ends. I know where this all goes. I choose to tell what's relevant to this story as we proceed, but the rest you're going to have to figure out for yourself. That said, how one person figures it out for themselves may differ fundamentally from how another person right next to them might see the same scene. But that's fun. That's the beauty in a way of comics. Unlike novels, unlike films, comics has a measure of subtlety, of that allows you to presume things that are equally valid but totally different.
Hmm.
So, but that's me being an old fart.
No, 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 no. I completely understand where you're coming from. I see
But you
the
disagree?
No, I completely agree where you're
Oh,
coming from. I get it because I come from that mentality too about letting characters just be who they are without making it like you said loud because they're real people. However, I will say that I do see, you know, now given the chance, a lot of writers have been trying to express these moments in comics for years, and now that they're given the chance, they can do so. So I get where they're coming from too, and the
well,
necessity of it for people that are themselves, questioning
but see, the
where
thing
can they
is,
see.
but the thing to bear in mind with comics,
Hmm.
and this was a fairly impassioned argument 20 years ago, is that when Grant came in and said the new X-Men, the first thing they were going to do is take the the school public.
Yeah.
The counter argument is you can't take it back. Once you do this, we're stuck with it forever. You can't jump up and say, "Oh, starting next issue, the school is secret." The
It was
one
all a dream.
No, doesn't work. The one
Right.
difference between the X-Men and every other group book in the Marvel pantheon is goes back to what I was saying before. Feared and hated by a world they're sworn to protect, or they have sworn to protect. The feared and hated part is an integral aspect of their reality. It
Hmm.
makes them totally different from the FF and the Avengers and the Defenders and whatever other clutch of heroes you have at your disposal. Because being a mutant creeps people out. And if you suddenly decide that we are going to have a school for gifted youngsters, if you're suddenly deciding that everything is public, then you have to ask the next question, which is what happens next? Now, in the movies, you saw what happens next. Hank McCoy becomes Secretary of Mutant Affairs. Okay, at least they have a direction to go in.
Right.
But in the comics, where where does that lead? And if you don't know that end game, then you have a problem. Now, the current answer to that is we have Krakoa. Now, the current vision of Krakoa is totally different from my vision of Krakoa. Why? Because
A
I
little
blew
bit,
him out
a
of the
little bit.
fucking atmosphere.
It's a little bit different. Yeah,
A little bit.
it's a big party now. It's a big
Well,
party. I thought you didn't keep up with comics, Chris. Have you
but
heard
see,
through
well,
the grapevine what's going on?
the other, but the other thing to bear in mind is, I mean, okay, going back to X-Men Black,
Okay.
we have an opening scene which is Magneto meeting Kate in the coffee shop, and then the 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 after scene, which is Magneto freeing the kids from Homeland. In between, there was a 3-page interregnum. Well, interregnum, 3-page gap. In the original script I wrote,
Okay.
we see Magneto wearing a pressure suit, and we discover he's on Mars. He's been on Mars for a week, and he's called back to Earth to deal with this situation. Why is he on Mars? Well, he's Magneto. He's doing what he does best, which is he's terraforming. He is reshaping Mars, so that in roughly a generation, which in comic book times means somewhere in the 23rd century, it will be terraformed sufficient to support human life. Why? Because at that point, all the mutants will leave Earth and come to Mars. Why? Because they're safe there. And heck, we'll even let you bring your folks if you want. But Mars will become mutant Israel, if you want to look at it that way. Why Mars? Because no one's going to fuck with them there. If anyone on Earth, if Iron Man or Thor decides to come to Mars, heck, we'll see him coming. And we can deal with it. We have the high ground in the solar system. And as far as the world's concerned, have a nice day. We don't care anymore. If the Avengers want to just kick ass and take names on our planet Earth, that's nice. Not our problem. We will live on Mars, happily ever after, and start exploring the galaxy. Hurrah. Because to me, that makes the most sense ever. If you got the power, you use it. Why the hell are you sticking around on this ball of rock in constant conflict with everybody? Why do you build an island? I mean, if you build an island, all you've done is make a convenient target for everybody. And trust me, if Tony Stark used to build weapons, he knows what to do if he needs it. So if Magneto or I mean, actually, if I were the National Security Council, I would be really anxious about a country where half of the ruling council are the 4 deadliest supervillains in modern history. Apocalypse? Oh yeah, totally trustworthy. Magneto? Conflicted. Sinister? Give me a fucking break.
You didn't know about Sinister. Okay.
It's just
so you are keeping up with what's happening.
well, no, but the point is, if you're going to establish a reality like that, deal with it. Deal with it in terms that the readers will comprehend. Is it a situation where Israel has now established diplomatic relations with Oman? Okay. Then Krakoa, I believe, right off the bat, established diplomatic relations with everybody. How did we do that? We planted trees. Okay. So what you're saying is Krakoa now has a point of entry to every country in the world. But what does that mean? How, that there are now 50 iterations or a dozen iterations of Kitty when they tried to bring her back and it didn't work? But what does that mean? Now, these could be the foundations of all sorts of interesting stories that are coming down the line. Great. I'll wait and see. But it seems, at least from what I have read, all the past that these characters have that possess, the people that they know, the places that they live, friends, whatever, has taken a significant back seat. So the question I would ask is, okay, what does this mean? I don't know. I'll have to read it. But these are, I mean, there are answers to this, I'm sure. The point is that, well, depends on how one, I guess the reader reacts to the answers, which is always the question. How can you do something? What will you do? And how will your readers react? But this is one of the things I have embraced from the earliest point of my career. No matter how good you think you are, there is always a banana peel waiting for you. You can always fuck up.
Mhm.
Now, at that point, you have Archie Goodwin's classic phrase, which is, okay, you fucked up. You got 30 days to fix it. End of story. Which is why I find myself anxious about giant crossover concepts. Because depending on where that banana peel is, I mean, you're either perfect from start to finish or there is a banana peel. And if there is a banana peel, but you've still got 30 issues to go in your crossover, this could be very awkward. So now that I've got myself in more trouble than I care to think about with higher authority, we'll see.
So you were mentioning writers earlier, sir, and there's a question here from John. He's asking, who is your favorite comic writer? Mine are Stan Lee, Alan Moore, Frank Miller, Roger Stern, Ed Brubaker, Chris Claremont. You're
Okay.
in there. Like, who you grew up, you were talking about Stan, but you also mentioned Louis Simonson, Walter Simonson, and Frank Miller. Who else, or who else, I guess, who else's work do you keep up with, or who else do you put
I,
up there
I,
as your
don't,
favorite comic writer?
I pretty much don't read comics anymore. Not, I don't have as much time. And since I'm not writing, especially not writing within a Marvel continuity framework, there's no reason for me to stick around. Um, I like. What do I like? No, it's just I have no memory at this point. So,
It
there
it's
are
okay.
writers I like. There are stories that I like. Off the top of my head, thinking of them is more challenging than it's worth.
Is there a particular? You've mentioned Salvador Roca. By the way,
La
I
Rocca.
love the way you pronounce that man's name. My man, rolling his R's. You mentioned him several times. Would you say he is your favorite artist to work with? Because you have worked with so much talent over the years.
Yes.
They've been
I mean,
blessed to have you as the writer, but they've drawn your books. You've had John Byrne, Dave Cockrum, John Romita Jr., Jim
mhm.
Lee, Mark Silvestri. Who is your favorite person that you have worked with? Like your favorite artist. If you were to be put on a book, you're like, I want that guy, or is it depending on the project?
Depends on the project. I mean, I have a project
Hmm.
now where I have a list of about a dozen old farts like myself. Um, I mean, the one disadvantage of not being current with material is that I'm not current with current talent. Um, it's I don't have a favorite artist for the same reason that I don't have a favorite issue. Whatever I name will instantly be followed by "but," you know, because there are too many good people out there that I've worked with that I haven't had the fate has not worked to the extent that I could work with them. Um, Too many have passed, sadly.
Yeah.
It's just, uh, and there's some new ones to discover. It and there are artists who you think are right, and then you do the story for them and it doesn't work. And there are artists who you never dreamed of being right that you do the story for them and it kicks ass. So I don't know. Uh, it's like everything else. Keep trying till I get it right. Part of it, I mean, part of working with Salvo has been a remarkable coincidence of my desire as writer versus and the desire of the editors to bring it about. Um, Salvo and I were wonderful on Extreme,
Oh
but
yeah.
then he got hijacked by the publisher to do
Namor.
Submariner.
Yep.
But the flip side of that was I got to work with Igor Corday, which was effing extraordinary. I mean, and then when Extreme came to an end, we got assigned to Excalibur 2.
New Excalibur. Yeah.
Well, the second Excalibur.
Hmm.
But, suddenly that book turned out to be Charlie's adventures on Genosha. I mean, from the fan base perspective, what the hell's that got to do with Excalibur? Which was created as a British-centric series. Well, I don't know, but we did it. But the thing with me was I considered it an extraordinary opportunity. Why? Because Igor spent the 90s in Sarajevo.
Hmm.
And from my thought was, holy cow, we'll get canceled pretty quickly, I figured. But imagine 12 issues on an island that has been decimated by the monster sentinel, which is effectively a land of the dead and the few handful of survivors, drawn by an artist who actually lived through the closest equivalent at that time in our history to that reality. I mean, my thought was, I couldn't imagine anyone who could do better at depicting the characters in that circumstance than Igor. So I thought, this is, if you'll pardon the expression, gold. It would be a grim, well, not a grim, but it would be of limited appeal because I wanted it to mean something. I wanted it to mean something beyond just punching and hitting.
Right.
And aside from that, not Salvo. Igor was so effing fast.
He was doing I think he was doing 3 titles a month at one time. If they needed to
those
fill
were
in artists, he
layouts.
was the guy. Like,
No,
this is
because
crazy.
he could slam out a 22 pages of layouts literally within a couple of days. But they looked at it. I mean, that was the heartbreak. But he was doing real pencils. I mean, he turned in something like 18 pages of issues 1 and 2 within a week. And I'm looking through them, and it's breathtaking. And I thought, this is going to work. This is going to be fun. It's Charlie and Magneto, 2 old guys on this island trying to figure out how to make it come back to life and along the way save the world. And the 2 of them are arguing with each other over Magneto saying, my way is the better way, and Charlie saying, yeah, your way didn't work, and he, vice versa. And then Marvel had second thoughts, and Igor got fired.
Oh,
Well, it's and there you go.
I, I, I'm going to express
Creator's
something.
plan, and God laughs.
I'm going to express the anger I had when I found out, because for years I had been living a lie. You were my favorite writer. You were the X-Men to me. You were Wolverine, Storm. And when I found out that you decided to leave X-Men, I was upset. I'm like, why is he leaving? This is messed up. And
Well,
then it wasn't until 2 decades later when I got to talk to you that you were, I told you, I was like, you left and at this point where the team was breaking up and we had two teams and you literally were like, I didn't leave because I wanted to. And the amount of anger that flowed through me when I found out that you were just kind of told to leave the book.
Yep.
Man, I can't. As a fan, I mean that boiled my blood, and I can't imagine what it must have felt like. 17 years working. I lost my job 2 months ago. Right? I've been only doing it for 3 months, and that's okay. Things happen. But you had been giving your blood, your soul, your life into these characters for 17 years, and
Well,
to be
there's a
told,
lesson.
"Geez."
From Marvel's perspective, now they could offer it to Grant. They could offer it to Joss Whedon. They could offer it to a whole host of writers who also grew up reading my stuff and loving the X-Men and wanted a shot at it themselves. That's welcome to publishing. I mean, I thought my flaw was thinking I was writing the best-selling book in publishing,
Yep.
and I've been doing it for 17 years, and that was enough to, for want of a better phrase, protect me. And nope. The irony was, I mean, Bob did it. This came about for practical reasons. Uh, Marvel felt that Jim Lee's contribution to the book was more valuable at that point than mine. And Jim wanted to do a certain set of stories, and I didn't because I'd done them twice already. I wanted to go in new directions.
Mm-hmm.
And they sided with Jim. And then, of course, like in less than a year, Jim and the other guys went off to found Image. So
That is
everybody, it turned out to be less effective than Marvel had suspected. But there you go. And as Bob
that to
himself confessed a couple of years later, in retrospect, they should have just found a way to make it work. That I didn't. But, shit happens.
You're right about that, sir.
Well, it's 30 years
It
ago.
does.
There's not much we can do about it.
No, we can look back on it, and you yourself, you've grown so much from that, and you have become this person that everybody looks to, like for advice for X-Men. So this is a really good question,
and
and
you can
one
tell
that
how effective that is by the number of comics I've written in the last 5 years.
if it was up to me, sir, you would write every
Yeah,
X-Men.
that's the thing. I mean, it's a balanced equation. The emphasis now is on bringing in new talent, seeing what new visions that can be brought to the characters, to the concept, to the reality. That's clearly what Marvel's doing today.
Yeah.
That's what they're supposed to do. They're a publisher. Each generation has to yield to the one that follows, whether they like it or not. For all that you love Daniel Craig's Bond, he's done.
Yeah, it's the last one, I think. Yeah.
Oh no, it is. And so there you go. Everything evolves, everything moves. Everyone was waiting excitedly for the next Star Trek. Well, not anymore. It's
Yeah, that's over and done with too, sadly.
until the the studio has second thoughts. You never know.
Right. This is
Or
a
if you
good
met
question.
Kevin
Have
Feige.
you met Kevin Feige? And
I've known Kevin Feige since 1998.
okay,
Yeah, we met.
so
He was Lauren Schuler Donner's assistant then, so we go back a way. That doesn't mean I'd be let anywhere near him these days, but yes, we go back a ways.
be
And
really
he's
cool to
fucking
have you
brilliant.
on the movies, though. How cool would that be?
I'd rather.
If anybody
Yeah, well,
deserves it,
yeah, but then you'd have to explain why. Why would we pay this guy when we can get it for free? Yeah,
and
but
that
I
is
mean
the way the universe works. You're right.
Yeah, there you go.
You're right. Listen, Mr. Claremont, I don't want to take up too much of your time, and I see we've already been on for 2 hours. I
Yes.
could talk to you all day, every day. You call me before bedtime and tell me an X-Men story, like how Gambit is the third Summers brother, or all these storylines that you wanted to do
What?
anytime. Yeah, maybe we can talk about that next time. Listen,
On the other hand, I will say, keep your
Uh-huh.
eyes peeled in December. It looks to be a very interesting month in terms of me and X material. Actually, not just X material, because I've just, hang on, my second Conan story.
Really? Oh, can you hold that up
the
again
last
really
one was
quick?
something like 40 years ago.
It's always a joy to get these omnis from Marvel and I see your name attached to so many characters that I had no idea like you were even involved with. And
Yeah.
as you know, my favorite writer, I always with your X-Men run. And I followed you. I got your Sovereign Seven, your Huntsman when you were doing it in for Image, and it's interesting to go back and look at some of these stories that you had written that you were a part of. So, man, yeah. So, what future projects is Chris Claremont going to be working on?
Just a whole bunch of stuff that Marvel will be bringing out in December, and hopefully some stuff beyond that. But most of it, bah, my lips are sort of sealed, as you can tell if I'm
Okay.
stumbling over words.
Well, say
Anyway,
no more. It is.
I have to dash. So
Okay.
It's been a lot of fun.
It's always a pleasure, and I'm serious. Let's do another one where my actual stream is working properly. But most people came here to see you. Okay, let's schedule one for December.
Okay.
We can talk about all these new stories you got coming up.
Okay.
So, thank you so much, Chris. Thank you, everybody in the chat, for joining us. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe if you haven't yet, and check out our sponsor, cheapgraphicnovels.com. Mr. Claremont, thank you so much.
You're more than welcome. Hate to dash. This is it. I'll be back.
Okay.